In the early hours of every morning, before the heat of Lagos rose from the earth like an invisible curtain, Tamara's heels would echo down the cement paths of the estate like a judge's gavel. Each confident step from her black, gold-buckled stiletto shoes carried more than just sound. It carried power. She never walked in haste. She never greeted without a smile. Her voice, always calm and creamy, said, "Good morning, sir," and "Ah, ma, you're looking beautiful today," in tones so smooth that even those who secretly hated her couldn't help but smile back. Wrapped in perfectly tailored ankara or sleek gowns that kissed her curves, she wore her wealth like perfume. Subtle, but unforgettable. Her handbags were original, never knockoffs. Her nails never chipped. And her braided wigs always laid flawlessly like something the angels might envy. But it wasn't her beauty that gave her that aura. It was the whispers that followed her presence. Whispers that said, "She's connected. I heard her cousin is in government. Someone said she used to date a commissioner. They say her name is untouchable." And in a place where rumors could cost you your peace, no one was ready to test whether those whispers were true. Tamara had only lived in the estate for 2 years, yet she already knew the birthdays of half the children, the favorite soups of 3 elders, and the widow in Block D who liked her generator started every Friday evening. She didn't live like a threat. She lived like a queen, attending every women's fellowship with a prayer book in hand and a smile so holy it belonged on stained glass. She laid hands on the sick and danced with fervor during praise sessions. When she wasn't leading worship, she was in her kitchen cooking food she'd randomly send to her neighbors. People swore they could smell coconut oil and promise in her meals. She laughed with the old, danced with the young, and bowed slightly to men who were not her husband. But underneath her saintly appearance, something moved. Something with claws. Something sharp enough to cut marriages into pieces. People suspected. Women occasionally glanced sideways when their husbands paused too long to greet Tamara. But no one ever said it out loud. Because Tamara had created an aura of danger that didn't look like danger, it looked like class. Like elegance. Like, "Don't try me, I have people." And in a society where a woman could be mocked just for sounding too bitter, no one was willing to risk being labeled jealous. There was something spiritual about the way she operated, like a soft fog that clouded people's judgment. Even the men who nodded at her from a distance swore they were just being respectful. And the women? They learned to smile back at her and pray harder. No one ever confronted her, not even when Sister Kemi suddenly left her husband, or when Mrs. Ada stopped attending Sunday service with her family. Each marital collapse was blamed on spiritual battles, financial strain, or communication issues. No one mentioned Tamara. Not because they didn't see, but because they saw too clearly. They saw the expensive car that picked her up sometimes. They saw the way a police car once waited outside her gate. They saw her make a phone call after a disagreement, and the next day, the other woman apologized without explanation. They saw the elders lower their voices when she walked by. And so a rule was formed in silence. You can cry about your pain, but don't cry Tamara's name. She was untouchable, unshakable. But what none of them knew was that beneath the quiet laughter of one tailor's wife, a storm was watching and waiting for the perfect time to remind Tamara that even thunder can wear a wrapper. The estate had learned how to cry without noise. It was a silent art, passed through stifled sniffles behind closed louver windows, and perfected in early morning packing when nobody was watching. They didn't call it heartbreak, they called it relocation, separation, or family emergency. But people noticed how Sister Ronk disappeared after just one loud argument. How her husband, Bro Benro, still lived in that house, now with unexplained peace. Some whispered that Sister Ronk had mental health issues. Others whispered that she had overreacted. No one dared whisper Tamara's name. In fact, her name had become a type of spiritual cement, hard, heavy, untouchable. Yet every time a woman disappeared, there was always a pattern, a period of strange smiles, new perfume smells on their husband's shirts, extra food arriving at their door with Tamara's handwritten notes, and then conflict. Explosive, private, shameful conflict. But even when things burned behind closed doors, no one dared open the window and scream. There was the case of Mama Peace, who once sold Zobo and meat pie from her veranda. One afternoon, Tamara passed by and complimented her stew. The next week, Mama Peace closed her shop. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Her husband stayed. Her youngest child cried for her daily. No one visited. When asked, the husband simply said, "She traveled." Just like that. And again, nobody pressed further. Then came Sister Amaka, tall, quiet, a schoolteacher. Her marriage seemed unshakable. But after a brief period of unexpected silence, people noticed she no longer wore her wedding ring, and her in-laws stopped coming around. Another home, silent, broken. Again, Tamara's name never entered the conversation. Why? Because those who had dared to mention it before had found themselves silenced quickly. One woman, Annie Lillian, once claimed Tamara was using something to entice men. 2 days later, someone leaked a photo of Auntie Lillian's husband at a bar with another woman. The post went viral in the estate WhatsApp group. By the end of that week, Auntie Lillian had shut down her tailoring stall and stopped attending morning devotions. Coincidence, they said. But Irene was watching, not guessing. Irene didn't say anything, but she had seen enough to draw invisible lines in her mind. She saw how women folded into themselves, how they stayed up at night kneeling beside their beds, not in prayer, but in negotiation with heartbreak. She saw how some women who once dressed brightly now moved like shadows, polished faces hiding cracked spirits. And she saw the one common thread that linked every tear, Tamara. But she also understood why no one spoke. In their world, silence wasn't just safety, it was survival. Nobody wanted to be the first to accuse a woman who knew too many people, smiled with too many officials, and carried herself like she knew your future before you did. So the estate learned to live with fear, masking it with smiles, Bible verses, and fried plantain. But Irene? She was sewing truth into every stitch, collecting pain into her pockets, and preparing herself. Not for drama, not for gossip, not for shouting, but for the day when silence would no longer be enough, and someone would need to name the ghost that had been walking among them with designer bags and innocent laughter. There was nothing extraordinary about Irene, at least not on the surface. She wore wrapper and blouse most days, her voice was soft like ironed cotton, and her tailoring shop, a tiny wooden structure attached to the front of their self-contained flat, was the kind of place people only visited when their regular tailor disappointed them. But what the estate didn't realize was that Irene noticed everything. While she stitched clothes and adjusted waistlines, her eyes danced in quiet surveillance. She had seen how Tamara's friendship pattern moved, like a shadow that always followed light too closely. She saw how Tamara had started buying cold malt drinks for children and helping elderly women carry their bags, but only after one woman had cried herself sick over her broken marriage. It wasn't charity. It was strategy. And while most people took her actions at face value, Irene watched with the eyes of someone who had been raised by a mother who once said, "Evil doesn't always wear rags. Sometimes it wears perfume." So when Tamara walked into her tailoring shop one breezy afternoon, all smiles and elegance, asking, "Sister Irene, please can you help me adjust this gown? I love your neat handwork." Irene's hands did not shake, but her spirit went still like a pond before storm. Tamara sat on the low bench by the window, crossing her legs with practiced grace. "Your shop is small but peaceful," she said, her eyes scanning the corners, as if searching for cracks in the walls or secrets in the shadows. Irene smiled, not showing teeth, and nodded. "Thank you, Ma." She kept her gaze on the fabric in front of her, pretending to pin a sleeve, but her ears were open. Tamara spoke softly, playfully, about nothing in particular, gossip from the women's fellowship, a joke about a neighbor's child, and then laughter. Her voice lingered, sweet and deceptive, like smoke from burning sugar. And then she said it casually, like someone mentioning the weather. "Your husband is very helpful, oh Baba J. I like how he always offers to carry heavy things for women around here. He's very manly." She laughed gently, tapping her perfectly painted nails on her phone. Irene smiled again, a little wider this time, and replied, "He's a good man. But I've told him not to carry people's loads anyhow." It's not every load that is physical. Tamara paused slightly, almost imperceptibly, but recovered quickly and laughed even louder, as if the joke hadn't landed on her. When Tamara left, her perfume lingered longer than her footsteps. Irene remained seated for a long while after, the same sleeve in her hand, unmoving. Her smile had disappeared. Her eyes were fixed on nothing. And inside her chest, something hardened, not fear, not pain, but confirmation. She knew what she had suspected all along. Tamara had entered her home in the only way snakes ever entered, quietly, with compliments. From that moment, Irene began to document. She did not tell her husband what she knew. She did not accuse him. She simply started folding pieces of the puzzle. The shirt he had worn on Wednesday that smelled unfamiliar. The money he claimed to borrow for work, but never returned. The text message she saw flash briefly on his phone. Thanks for this afternoon. You made me forget my stress. She memorized the pattern of Tamara's visits. How they increased on market days when Irene was away. How the curtain behind the house looked slightly shifted one afternoon. She didn't confront. She didn't cry. She stitched truth the way she stitched her clients' lace wrappers, tight, precise, and quietly preparing for the day it would be worn in public for all to see. In the days that followed Tamara's visit to her shop, Irene began to see the full extent of the illusion. Tamara wasn't just feared, she was respected. Not the kind of respect earned through kindness or age, but the kind rooted in caution, whispered rumors, and carefully avoided truths. When she entered any space, people adjusted. Elders stopped mid-sentence to nod respectfully. Young women smiled with caution. Husbands straightened their shirts. Children lowered their voices. Everyone treated her like a woman who could destroy their peace with just one phone call. And Tamara encouraged the mystery. She wore it like silk. One afternoon, she answered a call on speaker in the presence of two church women. The caller said, "We day wait for your order, madam. Oga say make we no start any arrest until you confirm." Tamara didn't flinch. She simply said, "I'll get back to you." The two women in the room exchanged glances. That same evening, one of them, Mama Comfort, deleted every message she had ever sent to the estate group. No one knew who Tamara knew, but everyone knew she knew someone. It wasn't proof that silenced them. It was suggestion. And it was working. There were whispers, always whispers. She has friends in uniform. One man that argued with her lost his shop in 3 days. They say she used to work for a big person in Abuja. None of it was confirmed, but all of it was believed. And Tamara played the part well. She never insulted, never shouted. She offered soft corrections, like, "I'm not the kind of woman you want to lie against," or "Don't talk like that around me. I have spiritual covering." Even the pastor's wife once referred to her as a woman of deep grace. But underneath all that poise was a clear message: don't cross me. And nobody did, especially not the wives. They smiled tightly when she walked past. They laughed too hard at her jokes. They allowed her to lead prayers in fellowship. Some even asked her to intercede on their behalf, because in their minds, it was better to endure her presence than provoke her wrath. But Irene was not like the others. She didn't see power in pretense. She saw manipulation wrapped in scripture, and intimidation disguised as elegance. And while the rest of the estate bowed their heads in manufactured reverence, she sharpened her silence. And so the days moved slowly, tension buried under greetings and fake laughter. Tamara continued to float through the estate like perfume, never touched, always noticed. Irene watched it all, like someone studying the weather before a storm. She saw how Tamara dropped calculated compliments, how she showed up at compound meetings with cold drinks, how she helped clean church chairs just enough to appear humble. She also saw how women folded into themselves whenever Tamara entered a room. Eyes lowered, mouth sealed. Even the ones who had once been outspoken now giggled nervously when Tamara was near. One evening during Bible study, Tamara prayed so powerfully that people said the ground vibrated. But Irene wasn't moved. She knew performance when she saw it. Later that night, Irene sat in her tailoring shop and wrote in her notepad, listing everything she'd observed in red ink. Change in Jide's behavior. Tamara's timing. Her silence weapon. Their shared language. Community fear. She underlined community fear twice. Because it wasn't just about her marriage anymore. It was about something deeper. A woman had wrapped fear in lace and praise, and the entire estate was eating from her palm. Irene folded the paper, placed it under her pillow, and went to sleep, not in worry, but in perfect clarity. For the first time in years, she understood the battle she was preparing for. It began with laughter, quiet at first, and then inappropriate. Jide, once a man of gentle rhythms and polite routines, started laughing too loudly at his phone, too often at things Irene couldn't see. He stopped waiting for her after evening prayer meetings, claiming he was caught up in discussions, or had branch one place. His phone, once left lying freely on the bed, now lived in his back pocket, even in the bathroom. Irene didn't question it. She noticed. She adjusted. She observed. Then came the smell. Not alcohol, not sweat, but something floral, something expensive. It wasn't her perfume. And he hadn't bathed in their house that evening. One night, while folding laundry, she found her green wrapper missing, the one with the deep embroidery she only wore on weekends. Jide said she must have misplaced it, but Irene knew her fabrics the way a soldier knows his weapon. Nothing ever went missing in her hands. It hadn't been misplaced, it had been removed. Then came the condescension. Subtle at first. Jide began criticizing things he once praised. "Why do you always tie wrapper like an old woman?" he asked one evening. The same wrapper he once said made her look regal. He stopped eating her food in full portions. He began calling her Madam Taylor, in a tone too sharp to be playful. And then one day, he walked in with pineapple slices in a neat foil wrap, claiming it was from one woman from Women's Fellowship. But Irene had seen that exact wrap at Tamara's gate the week before. She said nothing. She simply took the pineapple, placed it on the table, and went to sweep the compound. From afar, she watched Jide pace like someone caught in a story he couldn't fully remember. Irene didn't confront. She didn't rage. She added it to her mental ledger, the pineapples, the perfume, the missed evening hugs. Each one a confirmation. The last straw, however, wasn't loud. It was a moment, quiet, bitter, and irreversible. Jide received a call one evening and stepped outside. Irene followed after a few seconds to water the flowers. She heard him say, "No, she's still inside. I'll come when she's asleep." The silence between those words was heavy. When he turned and saw her, his face shifted, fast, like lightning, behind a mask. "I was talking to Son, my cousin," he said, too quickly. Irene stared at him for a long moment, then nodded and walked back inside. She locked the bedroom door, not out of anger, but out of finality. She lay on the bed, not in sadness, but in steady resolve. Her mind, now free of doubt, opened its doors to strategy. It was no longer a suspicion. It was war. And Irene didn't cry, not because she was strong, but because she'd already used her tears to wash her hands. Now, her hands were clean, dry, and ready to fight. Auntie Vivian was the last person to ever mention Tamara's name openly. It happened 6 months ago, and the estate still remembered. She had posted in the WhatsApp group, frustrated after seeing Tamara greeting her husband too warmly by the borehole. "Let us be careful how certain women parade themselves as holy but break homes silently," she had typed, not mentioning names, but everyone knew who she meant. Within hours, the post disappeared. The next day, a man claiming to be from CID called her husband, accusing him of spreading unverified defamation. The man was never seen again, but Auntie Vivian's husband became paranoid. The week after, her husband stopped giving her housekeeping money, stopped talking to her, and began locking his phone like it was a national treasure. Auntie Vivian withdrew from the fellowship, and when asked, she simply said, "Please, I don't want trouble." From that day, silence became law. The women in the estate learned that Tamara was not just beautiful, she was dangerous. Tamara never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her power was in suggestion, in the way she said, "My dear, I don't joke with prayer. Oh, God fights for me," directly. Or the time she told the young pastor's wife, Some women don't know how to mind their homes. And they blame others for their husband's eyes. She never pointed fingers, but her words stung. The message was clear, don't cross me. And no one did. Even Mom Nkechi, the estate's loudest tongue, suddenly grew quiet whenever Tamara joined the compound meetings. Her usual boldness melted into mumbled greetings and avoidance of eye contact. Tamara had woven fear into the fabric of everyday life. Nobody could prove anything, but everybody adjusted themselves around her. She wasn't a rumor, she was a shadow. I really watched this culture of fear grow like a weed. The silence wasn't just cowardice, it was survival. Nobody wanted to be the next person whispered about. The next one with a missing marriage. The next one whose husband turned cold and friends disappeared. I really understood. But she also knew that when fear becomes normal, evil flourishes. And, as she sat by her sewing machine one rainy afternoon, listening to the women laugh too hard at Tamara's joke from the next compound, she realized the danger wasn't just in what Tamara had done, it was in what she had made people believe she could do. The ghost of her supposed power had become more powerful than anything she actually said. And that, I really thought, was the most dangerous magic of all. The night she confirmed it all, I really didn't cry. She didn't drag Jide by his collar or storm the fellowship to point fingers. She didn't pace around the room or make emotional calls to relatives. She simply sat at the edge of her bed, wrapper loosely tied around her waist, arms folded over her knees, eyes dry and glassy. There was pain, of course, raw, solid pain buried beneath her chest like a concrete block. But she didn't let it leak. Instead, she breathed slowly, forcing herself to feel every ache without reacting to it. The silence in the room wasn't weakness. It was preparation. As the neighbor's generator hummed faintly in the background, she remembered her mother's voice from long ago. Never let your enemy know when you're bleeding. Let them think it's water dripping. And that's what I really did. She picked up her phone, opened the voice recorder, and saved Jide's conversation from earlier. It was nothing explicit, but enough to begin her file. She named it Untitled 1 and tucked it neatly in a new folder. It wasn't revenge she was planning. It was clarity. If truth were a river, I really was learning how to follow it, quietly. She started moving differently. She still cooked his food, still ironed his shirts, still laughed softly when he told those tired jokes he had suddenly rediscovered. But her ears were sharper, her memory keener. She bought a second notepad, one she never left out in the open. She documented everything. Jide's calls, Tamara's compound visits, dates, times, and strange receipts left on his trousers. She became water, colorless, tasteless, but everywhere. And she noticed more than she expected. Tamara's visits were always on days Iridi went to market. On those days, Jide would suddenly help fix something in the compound or disappear for errands that took hours. Iridi started adjusting her schedule, returning home early without warning. She didn't confront, she watched. And what she saw confirmed everything. A slight movement behind the curtain. A tray with 2 cups instead of 1. Jide's hurried explanation about why the bathroom smelled like new soap. Each detail was a sentence in the story they were writing behind her back. She collected them all. What surprised Iridi the most wasn't that Jide was lying. It was how easily he had become a stranger. This was the same man who once knelt to beg her after forgetting their wedding anniversary. The same man who used to pray with his hand on her belly when they were hoping for their only child. And now, he walked around the house like someone playing a role, forgetting his lines. She watched him pick at his food and scroll through his phone like he didn't know she was watching. But Iridi wasn't hurt in the way they expected. She was done with the performance of pain. She didn't want to weep in front of neighbors and explain herself to aunties who'd whisper behind her back. She wanted strategy, clarity. She wanted to unmask this thing without noise, because Tamara wasn't just stealing a man. She was insulting a woman's intelligence. And Iridi was done pretending she didn't see it. As she sat quietly beside her sewing machine the next morning, she looked at her thread box and thought, there are 2 ways to break a house, by fire or by pulling every hidden thread until it collapses on its own. She smiled to herself. She had chosen the second. The first woman Iridi reached out to was Ronk, the same sister Ronk who had once vanished quietly in the night, leaving only whispers and an unwashed wrapper on the clothesline. They met on a drizzling Wednesday at a roadside bukka in Ojota, far from the estate, where eyes didn't follow and tongues didn't wag. Ronk wore a scarf too big for her head and sunglasses, though there was no sun. Her face was older, her voice lower, and her smile absent. They didn't embrace. They didn't order food. They just sat. After a long pause, Iridi broke the silence with a simple sentence. It was tomorrow, wasn't it? Ronk didn't respond immediately, but her throat moved as if swallowing a brick. Then, quietly, she nodded. I wanted to fight her, Iridi, but she already had evidence. Voice notes. Photos. I don't know how she got them. She said if I ever spoke up, she would leak it all. Say I was the one chasing her husband. And my husband believed her. Ronk's voice broke like a bad radio signal. The worst part wasn't losing my home. It was watching people greet her more warmly after I left. Iridi's hands tightened under the table. She didn't cry for Ronk. She listened. She added this truth to her folder, not the digital one. The spiritual one. The emotional one. The one that would never forget. 2 days later, Iridi met with Amaka, the teacher who had gone on sabbatical months earlier but never returned. They met inside an empty classroom where Amaka now taught part-time in another estate. Her eyes were sharp, her sentences clipped. She came to me crying, saying she needed help talking to my husband about joining the men's prayer group. That was how she entered. The next thing I knew, she was advising him to be the head of the home, encouraging him to cut down unnecessary expenses, meaning me. Then my mother-in-law visited and found her cooking in my kitchen. I packed that same day. I refused to fight her. I just left. Iridi noticed Amaka's fingers trembling as she held a chalk stick, even though she wasn't writing. You're the first person who's asked me what really happened, she said softly. People only ask if I found another school. Iridi nodded. These weren't just stories, they were receipts. Silent ones. Buried under spiritual phrases and society's pressure to move on. But they were real. And they were forming a pattern only one woman dared to trace. The third woman was Bose, the boldest of them all. She met Iridi at the back of a local clinic where she volunteered. Unlike the others, she didn't speak with trembling lips. Her pain had fermented into anger. I confronted Tamara once, she said, her arms folded tightly. She laughed and said, even if I'm wrong, who will believe you? My husband believed her. Of course. She told him I was sleeping with my boss. She had fake screenshots. I don't even know how she got them. He slapped me. First time. Last time. I left that night. Bose looked at Iridi and said, you know, everyone thinks she's powerful because no one's dragged her yet. She feeds on silence. The more we cover her name with respect, the more she grows. Iridi nodded slowly. Everything Bose said echoed her own thoughts. These weren't just isolated attacks. This was a pattern of invasion. Tamara didn't destroy homes by accident. She selected them, entered like a guest, and dismantled them like a landlord reclaiming property. But now, Iridi wasn't just gathering evidence. She was building something else. A wall. A resistance. A slow, deliberate storm. And these 3 women, silent victims turned secret witnesses, were the first voices in what would soon become the loudest choir the estate had ever heard. Tamara didn't just hide behind silence. She wrapped herself in holiness like a veil. In the estate, where every woman carried a Bible and prayer meetings were considered lifelines, she mastered the rhythm of religious respect. She was the first to arrive at morning fellowship and the last to leave, often leading worship with closed eyes and hands lifted as if she were summoning heaven itself. Father, fight for your daughters, she would cry, her voice trembling with righteous authority. Women wiped their tears. Men nodded. Even the pastor's wife once whispered to Iridi, that woman is spiritually gifted. But Iridi watched differently. She observed how Tamara strategically positioned herself, kneeling beside the richest women during prayers, hugging widows during offering time, and walking home with women whose husbands were unstable. And after every powerful fellowship session, someone's home would begin to collapse. It wasn't just Tamara's presence that was dangerous. It was the confidence with which she operated, as if she believed that righteousness could be performed like a drama. Irene noticed how she used scripture as a shield and prayer as a distraction. Whenever someone questioned her closeness to a particular man, Tamara would respond with something like, "The devil is attacking our unity. We need to pray, not gossip." And just like that, the accuser became the accused. One time, during a women's fast and vigil, Irene heard Tamara prophesy directly. "There is a woman here who suspects her husband." God said to her, "Your tears will block your miracle." Several women cried in that moment. Irene remained still, unmoved. Her miracle wasn't blocked, it was sharpening. Because while Tamara prophesied, Irene was building proof. One evening, she switched her phone to record and caught Tamara rebuking a young girl who had accidentally called her auntie instead of sister. The voice was venomous, controlling, angry. Not the Tamara who danced in church. It was a crack in the mask. Irene played the recording over and over that night. The switch in tone, the pride, the sharp, rebuking authority that sounded more political than spiritual. This wasn't a prophetess, this was a performer. Tamara had learned that in Nigerian spaces, if you quoted 2 scriptures and cried once during prayer, people would grant you trust for life. And she used that trust like a weapon. But what she didn't realize was that while everyone else bowed during her prayers, one woman had remained standing in her heart. Irene understood the kind of power Tamara wielded. It wasn't mystical. It wasn't divine. It was carefully constructed. And now, with each audio, each pattern, each crack in her carefully built persona, Irene was preparing to not only expose her, but do it in a place where even scripture could not cover her anymore. It started with a photo, innocent at first glance. Irene had gone to visit a retired midwife who now ran a home-based health shop near the estate. While they chatted about herbal remedies and old stitches, the woman, Mama Dupe, brought out her photo album filled with past deliveries and community events. There, tucked in a corner of a fading picture, was Tamara, years younger, smiling faintly, holding a baby. What struck Irene wasn't Tamara's presence. It was the man standing beside her. It was Mr. Obinna, a quiet married man from the estate whose wife had struggled for years to conceive. Irene recognized him instantly. The date written under the photo was 4 years old. She asked no questions, only smiled and gently asked to take a picture of it for memory's sake. Mama Dupe agreed. Irene saved the image into her hidden evidence folder, heart racing softly. Later that week, she paid a visit to Mrs. Obinna under the pretense of adjusting her wrapper waistline. As they chatted in low tones over a sewing tape, Irene casually mentioned that she had seen a photo from years back where her husband looked so young and full of joy, holding a baby. She added gently, pretending to laugh. Mrs. Obinna's eyes froze. Her hands paused. "Baby? Which baby?" she asked. Irene tilted her head. "You didn't know." It was a soft explosion, one that detonated in silence. In that moment, Irene didn't need to say more. She had planted the seed, and it would bloom on its own. Mrs. Obinna didn't argue or cry. She simply sat back, her mouth slightly open, blinking fast. She hadn't known. And if she hadn't known, then the rest of the estate surely didn't either. Irene walked home slowly that day, not out of fear, but out of focus. Tamara wasn't just destroying homes. She was planting new ones in secret. A hidden child, a man too scared or too weak to speak, and a woman made to carry shame that wasn't hers. The game Tamara was playing was deeper than flirtation. It was erasure. Rewriting women's stories while pretending to uplift them. And now, Irene had something even more powerful than receipts or recordings. She had a secret Tamara never thought anyone would uncover. A child is not a rumor. It breathes. It grows. It exists. And in that existence lay the crack Irene needed to begin tearing Tamara's kingdom apart. It was on a humid Saturday afternoon that Irene noticed the plainclothes man stepping out of a tinted car just outside Tamara's gate. He wore black trousers, a tight-fitted polo, and shoes that looked too polished for casual errands. No greetings. No friendly waves. Just a firm, quiet walk into Tamara's compound. This was the third time Iridi had seen him, always silent, always watching. Most people believed he was Tamara's relative. Others said he was a government man. The fear around him was thick enough to keep questions away. But Iridi observed closely and saw something no one else paid attention to. He never stayed long, and Tamara never looked relaxed around him. Only strategic. So Iridi made a move. A week later, she followed the man from a distance when he left. Not far, just enough to know where he stopped, a car washed behind the old filling station. There he relaxed, smiled, lit a cigarette. Not a brother, not a government man, just a man playing a role, determined to peel another layer off Tamara's false empire. Iridi returned 2 days later, this time with a little gift, a cold bottle of malt and a calm voice. "My brother used to work here," she said to the man as he sat by the kiosk. They chatted about fuel prices and Lagos noise. Then, gently, she steered the conversation. "You sabi that fine woman for our estate? The one way they always enter your car." He smirked, amused. "Ah, that one? Omo, that woman sabi package, oh. She just day pay person make day show face. Make them think say get connection." Iridi smiled, nodded slowly, and stored the information deep in her spirit. That was all she needed. One sentence. The performance was unraveling. And it wasn't magic holding Tamara's influence together. It was illusion. A paid enforcer, nothing more. And illusions? They only last when nobody dares to look too closely. That evening, Iridi played the conversation in her mind as she stitched the hem of a customer's gown. The man's tone had been so casual, so unbothered, like a child revealing the secret to a magic trick. And that's what Tamara's power truly was, a trick. A beautifully dressed one, rehearsed with flair and delivered with perfect timing, but a trick nonetheless. She had built her empire on suggestion, on the fear that someone might come for you, on uniformed silence and gossip she never corrected. But now, that silence had been cracked. Iridi didn't need to shout. She didn't need to expose the man yet. She only needed to hold that truth tightly for the right moment. Because when you break a magician's illusion in public, you don't just embarrass her. You take away the only power she ever truly had. And Iridi was almost ready to pull the curtain. It started subtly, just like everything else in the estate. A shared look during morning prayers. A quiet conversation in front of the vegetable cellar. A hesitant knock on Iridi's tailoring shop door, followed by a whisper. "I saw something. Can I talk to you?" What no one realized was that the silence surrounding Tamara was beginning to fracture, not in one loud explosion, but in small, careful leaks. Mom and Ketchy, who had once deleted an entire day's worth of messages from the estate group out of fear, began to speak in private. She started with Iridi, sharing screenshots she had saved months ago. Old messages Tamara had sent, harmless in wording, but now, in hindsight, drenched in subtle manipulation. Messages that began as "Sis, I heard your husband's struggling, should I talk to him?" and ended in broken homes. One by one, the pieces surfaced. Soon, small groups began forming. Not publicly, not in the estate's general WhatsApp group, but through side conversations at the hair salon, the water tap queue, and even at the Sunday school gate. Women who had once nodded in silence when Tamara passed now leaned closer to one another, testing the air, whispering, "Have you heard?" One woman shared a voice note where Tamara giggled after someone said, "You day enjoy, oh." Another recalled the exact day her husband became distant, right after Tamara had brought him anointing oil to help his work. No one accused her aloud, but the invisible walls that had protected her image were beginning to tremble. Iridi didn't even need to push. The whispers were doing the work on their own. And Tamara noticed. She noticed how greetings became colder, how conversations paused when she approached, how even the children no longer ran to her like before. The air around her had changed. Her power, so carefully crafted through fear and holy pretense, was slipping. Not because someone had shouted her name, but because people had finally started listening to their own instincts. Irene, calm as always, continued her sewing, answering good morning to those who now looked at her with quiet respect. She said nothing, but in her silence, the estate found its courage. The era of whispers had begun, and it was only a matter of time before someone turned the volume up. Tamara felt it first in the silence. It wasn't loud, but it was thick, unnatural. The kind of silence that settled after your name had just left someone's lips. Where she used to receive warm smiles and affectionate Sister Tamara, "Good morning, oh," she now received polite nods and eyes that refused to hold hers. During fellowship, women who once rushed to sit beside her now pretended to be deeply occupied. No one accused her. No one fought her. But they no longer adored her either. And Tamara, who had spent 2 years building an image of elegance and invisible power, began to sense something crumbling beneath her heels. She became more animated in prayer meetings, shouting louder, crying harder. But instead of drawing people closer, it made them tilt away. It was as if they saw through the show now. G-Day, too, began to change, at first in ways she didn't fully grasp. He wasn't texting as often. He forgot the excuses she taught him to give Irene. Once she asked him to come by just to talk, and he responded coldly, "You 2-day press. I get family problem." That phrase echoed in her mind for hours. Tamara tried to draw him back with subtle threats, hints about the things she knew, reminders of messages she'd saved. But it didn't land the same way. His silence had changed, and she could tell someone was tampering with the foundation she'd carefully laid. Even in church, she noticed the stares. At first, she thought she was imagining it. But it became too consistent. Too sharp. Someone had been talking, but no one was saying her name. That's what made it worse. At home, she began checking her windows more often, locking her door twice. She moved more cautiously now, her confidence dimming like a bulb with low voltage. Her usual informants stopped updating her. The brother in the police hadn't returned her last 2 calls. When she walked through the compound, she could feel it, that heavy silence where admiration used to live. A few neighbors even avoided her completely. Something was happening, and she couldn't control it. For the first time since she arrived in the estate, Tamara was no longer the woman people envied or feared. She was becoming the woman people watched, quietly, cautiously, like a candle burning low, waiting to go out. The women's fellowship meeting that week was hosted in the central compound hall, plastic chairs neatly arranged, fans turning lazily, Bibles stacked beside handbags. As usual, Tamara arrived early, dressed in a spotless white blouse and a floor-length wrapper that shimmered slightly under the fluorescent light. She led the opening prayer, voice rich and tearful, hands lifted dramatically. But there was a difference in the room that even she couldn't ignore. The amens were softer. The usual chorus of supportive murmurs felt thinner. She noticed that even Mom and Ketchy, who always sat by her side, had chosen a seat near the back. When the time came for testimonies, a few women spoke, brief, generic thanks for life, health, and family. Then the leader said, "Sister Irene, we haven't heard from you in a while. Share something with us." Irene stood slowly, calmly. She didn't carry a Bible or notebook. Just her phone, which she held gently like a folded napkin. "Praise the Lord," she said, and a soft hallelujah followed. She smiled, looked around, and took a breath. "I want to thank God not just for deliverance, but for clarity, for opening my eyes and helping me see beyond appearances." Then she tapped her phone, connected it to the small Bluetooth speaker on the fellowship table, and pressed play. A voice filled the room. Familiar, silky, confident. It was Tamara, laughing, flirting, mocking. That one-day claimed Christian. Her husband no day sleep for house, the recording said. Then laughter. Then a whisper. "Just watch how I go handle her." The room froze. Tamara's face went blank. A chair creaked loudly as someone shifted. One woman gasped softly. Another covered her mouth. Irene stopped the recording after a few seconds. She didn't look at Tamara. She didn't speak again. She simply returned to her seat and crossed her legs. No accusations. No shouting. Just silence that burned hotter than fire. The hall, once filled with praise and clapping, now felt like a courtroom. Tamara couldn't speak. She couldn't cry. The weight of her own voice, unfiltered and unveiled, hung in the air like thick smoke. For the first time, there was no scripture to hide behind, no holy aura to weaponize. Just truth, raw, undeniable, and played aloud. The room didn't erupt. It simply shifted. Permanently. The hall was still quiet when Irene stood again. This time, she carried a medium-sized nylon bag. Her movements were unhurried, her face calm, like someone setting the table before a family meal. She walked to the fellowship table at the front and gently emptied the contents one by one. First, a red earring, glossy, familiar. Then, a small bottle of body spray. A church scarf that didn't belong to her. And finally, a printed screenshot, bold in color. A WhatsApp conversation between Tamara and an unsaved number referencing our usual spot and the time she'll be gone. Gasps echoed in the corners of the room. No names were mentioned, but everyone understood. Irene didn't narrate or explain. She only arranged the items carefully, then stepped back like an artist unveiling her final canvas. That's when the murmurs began. Women shifted in their chairs. Some whispered into their palms. Mom and Ketchy let out a sharp sigh and removed her glasses. One woman near the back, a young wife who had once invited Tamara to her naming ceremony, stood and walked out in tears. Tamara remained frozen, her lips parted slightly, her hands clasped in her lap, unmoving. Irene sat again, still without a word. She didn't need to speak. The silence was now doing what voices couldn't. It was convicting. A woman who had once been untouchable was now surrounded by tangible evidence. Her own careless confidence laid bare on a plastic table. Fellowship had turned into a tribunal, and no one dared to defend her. Not because they didn't know her, but because now they truly did. Then the floodgates opened. Quietly, at first. A woman raised her hand and said, "She told my husband I insulted her. I never did." Another added, "She sent my son money and told him not to tell me." One by one, testimonies turned into confessions, not from the guilty, but from the wounded. Each revelation chipped away at the image Tamara had spent years perfecting. Her power, once built on fear and suggestion, now collapsed under the weight of proof. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. Her silence, once her greatest tool, now became the loudest admission of all. When Tamara finally rose to her feet, the room fell silent again. She looked around, her eyes scanning every face, searching for a single ally, but found none. Then, slowly, she let out a wail. It started low, almost pitiful, then built into something theatrical. She staggered slightly, threw her scarf to the ground, and clutched her head. "They've used something on me," she cried. Her voice cracked. She stumbled to one side of the room, dropped to her knees, and began rolling on the tiled floor. "You people want to finish me. You want to destroy what God is doing in my life." Her wrapper loosened slightly as she rolled, but no one moved to help. No one reached for her. Everyone watched, stunned, but unmoved. Some crossed their arms. Others whispered, "She's acting." Auntie Blessing leaned toward Mama and Ketchy and muttered, "But she was fine 5 minutes ago." Another woman pulled out her phone and began recording, silently, discreetly. Tamara, noticing the lack of response, intensified her performance. She began speaking in tongues, loud, aggressive tongues that didn't flow like worship, but crashed like thunder. She reached for the pulpit and knocked down a bottle of anointing oil. "I said, leave me alone. You witches. You jealous women," she shouted, pointing randomly. No one replied. The women who had once looked up to her now looked past her, as if something had broken. Because something had. Her illusion had been ripped open, and what was left wasn't a spiritually gifted woman. It was a desperate one, clinging to a mask that no longer fit. After nearly 15 minutes of flailing, shouting, and tears that dried too quickly, Tamara grew quiet. She sat on the floor, panting, eyes wild but unfocused. Still, no one approached. Even. The prayer coordinator remained seated, her hands folded on her lap. It wasn't that they lacked compassion. It was that they had finally seen too much. When someone builds a kingdom on silence and manipulation, the fall doesn't need noise, it needs clarity. And that day, everyone had received it. Tamara's performance ended not with applause or sympathy, but with stillness. A stillness that told her, your time here is over. Jide was already waiting outside the house when Iridi returned from a fellowship. He sat on a single plastic chair, arms crossed, lips dry. The neighbors had seen the video. Someone had already sent it to the estate side group, and it had spread like kerosene fire. The same video where Tamara, once poised and polished, rolled on the ground screaming nonsense. But what made the video even more damning was Iridi's silence in it, composed, quiet, untouched. And now, Jide had no words. When Iridi walked past him without a glance, he cleared his throat once, hoping she'd stop. She didn't. She entered, shut the door gently, and left him outside under the hot sun. No insults. No explanations. Just the sound of a man left to sit in the consequences of his foolishness. The elders came later that evening, 3 of them. They didn't come to beg. They came to ask questions. Did you know what that woman was doing? You mean to say you didn't notice anything? How could you allow someone like that so close to your home? Jide had no answers. He looked like a boy caught cheating in an exam he didn't study for. And Iridi, sitting by the window, didn't interrupt once. When the oldest elder turned to her and said, "My daughter, what do you want us to do?" she replied simply, "Nothing. He'll stay outside for now. When it rains, maybe the water will teach him what words could not." The room was quiet. No one argued. No one pitied Jide. He had sold his peace for flattery and watched as it burned, silently. For the next 2 days, Jide became a fixture in the compound, seated outside with a Bible in his lap and a towel around his neck. People passed him and greeted politely, but no one stayed to chat. The same men who once envied him for having a quiet, submissive wife now pitied him with their eyes. He had traded gold for glitter and now sat in the dust, waiting for forgiveness that wouldn't be rushed. Inside, Iridi continued sewing, humming softly to herself. The same hands that mended clothes had held a home together for years, and now those hands were busy with something else entirely, rebuilding herself. When the video of the fellowship incident made its rounds beyond the estate, reaching even the church board and men's evening group, the elders could no longer ignore it. These were the same elders who had once nodded in approval as Tamara prayed or quoted scriptures during events. The same ones who had pretended not to notice the trail of broken homes behind her smiles. Now they were forced to gather not to discuss property or street dues, but to address the rot that had festered quietly under their leadership. They met under the mango tree near the security post, as tradition demanded, each one arriving with a folded newspaper and shame in their eyes. For a long time, no one spoke. Then one elder said, "We allowed too much silence in the name of peace." They called for a general estate meeting, something that hadn't happened in months. The turnout was larger than expected. Everyone came, even those who usually found excuses. When the matter was brought up, there were no debates. The evidence had already spoken. Tamara had manipulated, threatened, and humiliated too many people under the guise of holiness. Elder Adebayo stood and addressed the crowd, voice low but steady. "We cannot claim to lead if we protect fear and shame. That woman broke homes, and we watched. No more." The decision was unanimous. Tamara was banned permanently from attending any estate events, including church fellowships, and her tenancy would not be renewed. Her name would no longer be protected by status or silence. The women sat quietly during the meeting, listening as the men finally did what they had failed to do before, acknowledge the damage. Iridi didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her work was done, and the truth had spoken louder than any accusation could have. As the meeting ended, people began to look at her differently, not with pity, but with respect. She had done what no one dared to do, not by shouting, but by seeing clearly and acting wisely. And now, with the elders finally stepping into their roles, the estate had taken its first real breath in months, deep, relieved, and honest. Tamara didn't wait for morning. Pride wouldn't let her face the light. Around midnight, under a weak moon and flickering security bulb, she slipped out of her compound with just one suitcase and a half-zipped handbag. No car came for her this time. The usual tinted Toyota didn't appear. She wore a large hoodie over her nightgown and carried her heels in her hand. Her makeup was smudged, hair uncovered. It was the first time she left the estate looking like someone ordinary. There were no prayers on her lips, no fake tongues, no authority in her steps, just a quiet rush to disappear. One or two people heard the gate creak and peeked through their curtains, but no one opened their doors. She didn't say goodbye. No one offered it either. The estate guard, seeing her approach, stood up in confusion. "Auntie Tamara, you day travel?" he asked, blinking away sleep. She didn't answer at first. Then she muttered, "Just open the gate." Something in her voice stopped him from asking again. He unlocked the padlock slowly, watching her step into the road barefoot. The neighborhood dogs barked, but none followed her. The street was empty, just the way she needed it to be. No audience. No farewell drama. As she walked down the familiar path she had once ruled, her shoulders hunched, shrinking into herself. Behind her, the estate gate closed gently, not with force, but with finality. By morning, her compound looked abandoned. The door was left ajar, and her flower pots stood overturned, dry. Word spread fast. She donned Comet. She really left in the night? Just like that. Children peeked into her veranda. Some laughed, others whispered. No one touched her things. No one tried to claim them. It was as though her presence had vanished not just from the estate, but from memory. And while many didn't speak of her after that, the silence she once used as a weapon became the very thing that buried her. Not with noise, not with scandal, but with quiet rejection so complete, even the walls seemed to sigh in relief. Days passed, and the estate began to feel lighter, as though an invisible weight had lifted. The tension that once lived in doorways and whispered prayers slowly gave way to laughter from balconies and long-forgotten neighborly greetings. Children ran freely again, no longer pausing when they saw certain faces. Women who had once kept their voices low during conversations now shared stories over bowls of pepper soup and hair appointments. And Irene? She remained as steady as ever. She didn't change her routine. She didn't dance in triumph. She still opened her shop each morning, tied her wrapper the same way, and hummed while she worked. The only difference now was the silence, this time not from fear, but from peace. Jide remained in the house, though not as a husband in full. Irene allowed him inside, but gave no promises. He slept in the guest room, washed his own clothes, and cooked when she didn't feel like it. He greeted her softly each day, hoping for warmth, but she gave him only the necessary kindness, nothing more. She wasn't cruel, just distant, and he knew better than to ask for more. The damage was deep, and apologies couldn't erase it. The community saw the change and respected it. Irene had chosen neither revenge nor reconciliation. She had chosen clarity, and that, perhaps, was more powerful. Because her calm refusal to collapse, to shout, or to grovel had restored more than just her dignity. It had restored the estate's conscience. Life moved on, but Tamara's absence remained a quiet landmark in everyone's memory. Her story became a silent warning passed through glances and cautious laughter. And while her name faded from daily conversation, the lesson she left behind did not. As for Irene, she stood each morning beside her sewing table, threading needles with a steady hand and a cleaner heart. She didn't rebuild with noise or with help. She simply lived, intentionally, quietly, fully. And in doing so, she reminded every woman in the estate that silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it means strategy. And sometimes the loudest victory is the one no one hears coming. Please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.